Hello, in this video I will discuss the vocabulary of Chapter 1. I won't always discuss each word because that would get repetitive, but for the first chapter I will. Now, the first few words in the Chapter 1 are pretty obvious, like me. It's just me, as in I love me, so no problem there. Quid? Well, this is interesting. This is actually a cognate of what, which is also what it means. Now, do you remember when I said that a K sound in Latin corresponds to an H sound in Germanic languages like English? So, for instance, Latin canis, that is, dog, or actually, literally, a hound. C corresponds to H. Well, Q is also a K sound, quid, corresponds to this H. Here's the U that corresponds to that W, and D corresponds to T. Those are quite similar sounds. We don't need to get into the linguistics of it, but for now you can take my word for it. Those are cognates. Now nihil is the only noun we get in this chapter, which is funny. We get me, which is a pronoun, but nihil is a neuter noun. Wheelock doesn't mention that, but the gender is neuter. We'll talk about gender in a little bit. This just means nothing, so it shouldn't be too hard. But a nice cognate to remember it by is nihilism, I guess, belief in nothing, nihilism. Or nihilism, some people say. Non, also pretty easy, it's just not, so you shouldn't have any trouble remembering this one either. Saepe, another adverb like non, which just means often. So there's no cognate that I know of or that I can think of off the top of my head here, but saepe, it's often. Si, if. Again, I can't think of a cognate, but maybe Wheelock lists one. Now we get to the verbs. Amo, amare, amāvi, amātum. Now, you'll see two types of verbs here. Verbs that are like laudare, and that's like this one here, laudo, and laudare. See, are, that by the way is a U. Laudare, and laudare also goes on laudavi, laudatum. And then there are verbs like monere. We'll see some of those here too. Wheelock gives you the so-called principal parts of each verb. That's what this is. Principal part 1, 2, principal part 3, and principal part 4. The principal parts of a verb are the basic parts that cannot be derived from each other. This is like, in English we have see, that is as in I see you, saw, I saw you, and seen. I have seen you. These are the principal parts of the verb, and they cannot be derived from each other. That is, unless you know that saw is the past tense of see, then you wouldn't be able to figure that out. There's no logic to it. It's just that's the way it is. Same thing with seen. There's no logic to why we say seen instead of something else, but that's what we say. It's a principal part. You can't figure that out based on see or saw. You just have to know how that verb works. It's the same thing here. Now, once you know what a first conjugation verb looks like, you'll be able to figure these out if it is indeed a first conjugation verb. Because you see, laudo, laudare, amo, amari, amāvi, amātum. They're all basically the same. But there are other verbs where it gets a little more complicated. Cogito, cogitari, cogitavi, cogitatum. This is just here, I think, as in I think therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. And there are some cognates of this. For instance, to cogitate means to meditate or think about something, to cogitate on a matter. That was meant to be an I. So, to think. Wheelock probably gives some other definitions too. Debio, debere, debui, debitum. And you see this is a second conjugation verb, like monere. So you get moneo, monere, quite similar again, monui, and monitum. These are the principal parts, of these verbs. They're quite similar, but again, I mean, so you know the patterns, you can figure these out, but there's no logical reason for why debui and not debio. It's just the way things are. Next verb is do, dari, dedi, datum. This is just I give, or to give. Now, an interesting thing here about this, by the way, the third principal part, I forgot to mention this earlier. We know what these two are, right? Do is I give. It's the first person singular present. Dare is the infinitive, the present infinitive, I should say. Dedi is the it shows you how to do the perfect tense, which of course we don't know yet, but you should memorize these already with the vocabulary so that when we do learn the perfect tense, you don't need to go back and relearn these. And this here, the fourth principal part, is datum. That is the passive. That will show you how to form the passive. Again, we don't know how to do that yet. We won't learn that for some time yet, but it's better to learn this now, or to memorize these principal parts now so that you don't have to go back and relearn this vocabulary. So there are some pretty good cognates here. One of the best cognates to remember is the dative case. It's a case in Latin and in other languages like German or Russian. The dative case, which is the case that do dare always takes. That is, when you give something to somebody, you have to use the dative case. We'll get to that a little later. Terreō, errare, amāvi, amātum. You can see this is a first conjugation verb. Means to wander or to err. So we have, metaphorically, it means to be in error or to be wrong, and that's of course where we have our noun error. Literally, it means to wander. We took in English the metaphorical meaning. Laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatum. We know this one already. To praise. We get words in English like lauds. There's a cognate to that to help you remember it. Moneo, monere, monui, monitum. We know this one too, so no need to go over it again. Salveo, salvere. Well, this is, as you can see, this is a second conjugation verb, but Wheelock doesn't give us the whole principle, all the principal parts. I think we get words like salvation from this one. Here, it's mostly used as a greeting. Terreō, terrui, terrui, terratum means something along the lines of to preserve, maybe to save. And we get nice cognates from this, like reservoir, preserve, and so forth. Here we have another first conjugation verb. In fact, it's the same verb as the last one, just with a prefix, con. And here we have, it's a word like conserve, or we get nice cognates like conservative from it. If that helps you remember it. Terreō, terrere, terrui, territum. Like monere, it's a second conjugation verb, means to terrify or to frighten. Of course, we have some cognate or some derivatives from this, namely terrible or to terrify, right? There's no, so we've borrowed that verb, to terrify somebody or to be terrified. Next verb, valeō, valere, valui, valiturum. Excuse me, to be strong, to have power, to be well. We have some cognates from this, like valid, or validate if you want to make it a verb. And then video, videre, vidi, visum, to see. Again, I think, well, you see here, this looks like a lot like monere, but it's not exactly like it. You already have a funny perfect principal part. So as you can see, those patterns help, but they're not a surefire way to know what all the principal parts are. You have to know you have to memorize the principal parts. And the cognates to this are quite obvious, words like vision. So this shouldn't, video, like my videotape. So this shouldn't be too difficult to remember. And finally, voco, vocare, vocavi, vocatum. This just means to call or to summon. And we have quite a number of cognates from this, like the first thing that comes to mind is vocation, one's calling. So it shouldn't be too hard to remember that one. That's the vocabulary for Chapter 1. As I said, I won't always go over every word. Maybe the interesting ones, the ones that might be hard to remember, the ones in which learning the cognates would be very useful. Otherwise, next up, we'll go over the sentences in this chapter.